Yeah, it's always nice to go live and just create conversations. And I feel like I learn a bit about myself as well when I do these things as well. So it's always good to do that. So chuck questions to me. You can ask me any sort of questions that you want to ask me. And I'll just talk about the usual stuff. And what normally happens is I find myself going off down some sort of rant. So we're going to do that today. Oh, Beijing, hello. So what I thought I'd start talking about, it's interesting because I posted this week about the forgiveness thing, and it seemed to resonate with quite a lot of people. My favorite color at the moment is light blue, but it kind of changes. Light blue, that's my favorite color. I don't know why, but I have a bit of a thing with colors where it changes. But yeah, I posted about the whole forgiveness thing, and it felt like it resonated quite a lot. And it's something that I'm going to talk about that in a minute, the breathwork thing. It resonates with quite a lot of people because I think, look, what I think is quite common within the sort of healing space and within this world is we come up with concepts and ideals, right, that sound really, really good in the concept of them, but I don't think they necessarily are reality when you look at real life. I do think what a lot of us do, myself included, right, I'm always reflecting here, is we live up in our rational part of our brains, and so our defenses come from our rationale, and so we try and rationalize something. And this relates to the question about breathwork earlier. But I do believe that so many of us are often living in our rational part of our brains, and we don't even know how sad we are. We've got no idea even how sad we are. And I know in myself, when I've looked at my own, reflect back on my own healing journey throughout my time, what I would often be doing is saying that, you know, I've forgiven this and I'm not angry about this anymore. But what I would normally be doing is redirecting that anger somewhere else. So I remember very vividly saying to somebody early on in my healing journey that I'm not angry towards my dad and the addiction that he had. I said I had no anger there. But the reality is that anger was there, but I wasn't directing it there. I was directing it somewhere else because it was too painful for me to admit that I had anger towards my dad as a result of what I experienced at his drinking. And I think like a lot of the stuff that we see, that's given us solution stuff is often this rational brain stuff. And so like forgiveness, I think, is a little bit like that, right? As a concept, I think it's a really nice thing. But ultimately, I don't think it's necessary all of the time, right? I think it's good if you can do it. I don't think it's always necessary. And the way that this links to what the breathwork, the question about breathwork, is the reason that I think breathwork for emotional release, the stuff that I do, and you can find lots of stuff out there. The reason that I think that's so important is because we trap so much of the ways that we feel in our body. And I can rationalize my way out of it if I want. And I think we try to do that. But to do that, you have to stay up in your rational part of your brain because your body's telling you something different. And so one of the videos that I shared and was commenting on was a guy that was like saying, you know, healing happens when you forgive and when you forget, and you can thank the people that hurt you and said, thank you for teaching me a lesson and all that sort of stuff. I think it's great, but it's not real life, is it? Okay, I'm going to do some of these questions. Let me start with that one first. How do you heal and know when you have healed? How do you know when you have healed? My answer to the question is that I think the moment that you think that you've healed is the moment that you're in for another fall. Because I don't think that it's a destination that you reach. I don't think we get to this place where we are healed. I think it's always a journey that we find ourselves on. And again, I think that's another mistake that I see online a lot. You know, a lot of people tell you that you can reach this place, you know, heal your trauma, set boundaries, right? And succeed and smash life and all of that stuff. And look, I think some of the people that put that stuff out and say that stuff, say it from a place of truth because that's where they're at in that moment. They just haven't had the next fall yet. And then I think some people say it because because they're trying to sell something or because they're just bypassing, right? And so for me, what I would do is answer the question of what is healing. Healing for me is just about being consciously aware of who I am as a messy human in this messy world. And rather than kidding myself and living in denial of the ways that I feel, being much more aware of them, understanding them, and being able to love myself through them. Healing isn't about making yourself lovable, right? Healing is about understanding that you're lovable in all parts of yourself, with all of your mistakes and all the messiness that comes with life, right? And actually, I think something that most of us need to heal from is the idea that the way that we are is not lovable. And so we set about trying to be good enough. We set about trying to be lovable, which is actually the pattern that we've played out all of our life, because the healing comes from the fact that in those initial years, for whatever reason, and there's a million and one different reasons why this would happen, but our culture is built, I think, to kind of make this happen to children, is that you got the message that in and of yourself, right, you're not lovable, right? Nobody taught you and showed you that your value and your beauty is innate, yeah? It's in you, and what communities and structures and societies are supposed to do for children is help young children to discover that in themselves. Actually, what we do is we bring children into the world, and then we go, here's the system, and you need to adapt yourself in order to fit into the system. And some of that, right, some of that, of course, is part of living in a collective society, in that if I want to be able to live amongst other people, then I need to do a certain amount of sort of changing myself and who I am, right? But I think a lot of the healing work is not about making yourself lovable. It's about, you know, understanding that you are lovable, and how do you know that? And another thing, quickly, just before I go to some of these other stuff in there, that I would add to that is that I so often hear people will be doing something, you know, people will turn up to my breathwork sessions and say, I've never loved myself and I don't know how to do it, right? And I would always answer that and say, I think what a lot of us struggle with sometimes is not that we don't know how to love ourselves, because you wouldn't be at a breathwork session that I'm putting on if you didn't at least have a part of you that loves yourself enough to see and think that there's something different, right? What most of us struggle with is knowing what it feels like when we are being loved. And that's slightly different. Somebody asks here, how do you forgive yourself? I think in order to forgive yourself, you have to be gut level honest about who you are and why you show up to the world in the way that you do. And you have to see the things that you've done wrong in your life in order to be able to forgive them. So you have to start in a place of looking at the mistakes that you make in your life, right? And once you list them out on paper, and then you look at what drove them, and you look at the things that caused them, right? So let's look at some of the mistakes that I've made in my life. So drinking too much, for example. When I had a drinking issue, what was driving that drinking problem? A need to escape, a desire to be loved, a want and a need to fit in, right? So I can see the reasons why I do that. Let's take another one, allowing myself to be in relationships that didn't serve me or weren't good to me. Why did I do that? Fear of not being loved, desperate to be liked, right? And when actually what you'll find is that when you list all of the things that you've done, all of them, when you list all of them, you'll realize that what was driving them was self-preservation. What was driving them was either a fear of something or an actual reality of something that you were desperately trying to push back at, and you were doing the best that you could with the tools that you were given up until that stage of your life. And I think that's where self-compassion comes from. And to quote Gabor Mate, he says, I'm a human being who in that moment hadn't yet found a better way to soothe my pain, so I'm going to forgive myself. All right? So that's like, obviously, I can't tell you exactly how to forgive yourself in a moment, but that's where I would start. Here's a really, really good question. I can't decide whether to let my son have a relationship with my narcissistic mother. This is really common, right? And there's no like straight answer that I can give you here. But what I would say is that you have to do what's right for you and your children, not what's right for what society thinks and tells you that you should do. Because the reality is that people around you in society is going to say to you, it's their grandparent, you know, you need to let go of all this stuff. Nah, you need to do what's right for you and what's right for your children, and ignore what everybody else says, because nobody else, you know, most other people have got no idea what they're talking about. Can you repeat that saying? I said, and it's not mine, it's Gabor Mate says it. I'm a human being who in that moment hadn't found a better way to soothe my pain, so I'm going to forgive myself. Best way to handle a violent relationship. Best way to handle a violent relationship as a man with kids involved. It's a difficult question, like, for me to answer without context. But if kids are seeing any kind of a violence, if children are seeing violence, right, then they are experiencing domestic violence. So when you put it that bluntly, what, you know, how would you answer it then? But it's a difficult question because I don't have context. Any advice on healing from childhood trauma now I've just had my own child? Good question. Look, there's a lot of people now that say, you know, do the healing work before you have children. Let me tell you this. You won't know, some people, you know, in some cases, you won't know the healing that you need to do until you have children, because your children will bring out all of the stuff that you've been running away from in your life. And so I think what a lot of people find is that when they have children, that's when they start to realize that some of the things that they experienced when they were younger wasn't right. And you see these, you know, you have a child and you see it and it's full of all this childlike wonder and it wants to learn about the world and it's like a sponge and it's going to soak up everything in its environment and everything that's around it. And when you start to see that, then I can feel it in my body now. It starts to trigger like, shit, man, like, shit, some of the things that I've normalized in my mind to protect myself weren't normal. And they would have had a huge impact on the child that I was. So it triggers you. So then you have to start doing the work. The greatest thing I think that I can do for my children is continue to work on myself. Because here's what I think. If as a child I grew up in an environment where for some reason, whatever reason, there weren't adults around me that were emotionally available to be able to hold space for me to explore my emotions and to discover what they were, then I will have grown up being absolutely terrified of my own emotions, right? Or not even known what they were, right? If when I experienced a big emotion, and think about what a big emotion feels like, it's a big physical feeling in my body. If I'm a 3-year-old, and nobody's putting their arm around me and explaining to me what I'm going through and helping me to co-regulate and move my way through that emotion. If nobody's doing that, and worse still, I have a sense that if I show this emotion, it's going to upset one of my parents or primary caregivers, then guess what I'm going to do as a child? I'm going to learn to detach from my body. My body and my brain is going to develop in a way that helps me to disconnect from the ways that I feel, right? So then I just get left with all this stuff going on in here and I've got no idea what it is. So it would make perfect sense that if I discovered things when I moved into my teenage years that helped me to disconnect further from the ways that I feel, then it makes perfect sense that I would drink in the way that I did. It makes perfect sense that whenever I feel a feeling, I chuck food on top of it. Why? Because no adults within my life when I was a child were able to be present enough for me to experience my emotions fully. So the best work that I can do for my children is to find ways to be in my body. So when they come to me with their emotions, I can be in my body and I can help them to co-regulate. And let me tell you, if you get to do that 20% of the time as a parent, I think you're doing bloody well. Like, genuinely, I think you're doing bloody well. And here's the thing, I talk a lot about toxic parents and we'll probably talk about some of that stuff as well in a minute. But the systems and the culture that we live in within the world today are not set up for children at all. They're not set up for children at all. We don't do anything to proactively protect our children. We don't do anything to proactively help our children to grow up and to be the versions of themselves that they're supposed to be, right? Even to the point of when we tell parents now, still have been doing this for a number of years now, right? That when a baby cries, you need to leave them, right? And let them cry it out, right? And Gabor Mate talks a lot about this. And I think he talks about it in his latest book even. And he says, right, you let them, you know, of course, letting them cry it out works because it teaches the child there's no point in crying because nobody's coming. Now, if you look at the broader idea of why we do that to children, we do that to children because we now exist in a society where having a child attached to a parent, like they should should be for a while. Yeah, whichever parent it is, they should be attached to one of them for a number of years. We can't do that anymore, right? Because we now live in a society where it's like we need to get both of these parents back to work as quickly as possible, and we need to get the child detached from one of their parents way quicker than nature ever wanted us to do it. So rather than having this child that comes into the world and we go, I'm going to nurture you and help you and be there for you to help you to become the version of yourself that you're born in this world to be. The moment the baby comes out, we go, here's the system and you need to fit into it. Right? So if you want to be somebody that wants to be attached to your parent, sorry, can't do it. It doesn't work in the system. Right? And then what happens is we all grow up with this like poor attachment, not being very emotionally good, right? And all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then we label everybody as being the problem. Nobody goes, hang on a minute, what if the system's the problem? Everybody just goes, they are the problem. Yeah, Gabor Mate is against letting babies cry without attending to them. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, and people are talking about how it's created by design, but this is the reality. And again, Gabor Mate talks a lot about this, right? We now send off babies as well, like young children, very young, to be like looked after by one adult when there's loads of them, right? And again, because that's the systems that we live in. Hi Josh, I remembered what you said about different diagnosis labels that you have identified with and rejected again throughout your life. I found that so interesting. Can you say more about that? What can I say about it? Look, I think that I think labels can be really good. I talked about this on the last live. I think any label can be really good because it can help me to find people in a similar situation. It can be a great starting point for me to go on and find it. What I think is the problem is if I then take the label and go, I'm going to label this, empath, alcoholic, whatever it is. I'm going to take that label and then I'm going to make the label the reason why I am like I am. It's not that way round. I am like I am, and here's the label for that. Is how it works. When you do it the opposite way around, then it becomes restricting, right? And I've talked about as well extensively about how we wouldn't do this with any other species of animal, right? If there was loads of animals that were all struggling. Oh, my phone just rang then. If there were, am I back? I'm back. Oh no, is my phone gonna... No, I'm here. Sorry, my phone rang. I'm here. I worry about the ways I brought my son up when I didn't know better. At what point can I talk to him about his inner child? He's now 22. Look, I would say, look, I think you probably did a much better job than you might give yourself credit for. But what I would say is that the only thing you can do is create space for them to be there so that when they feel... Here's the thing. People say the saying is, people say, be the parent you needed when you were a child. I don't think that's true. Don't be the parent for your children that you needed when you were a child, because then you're still coming at them from a place of you. For your children, you should be the parent that they need right now. Yeah. So sometimes it can be easy for us to go, I know what happened. I know what I needed and this is what worked for me. And then I need to put that onto my children. And it's not always the case, right? I know what I've done a lot with my children, particularly one of my children, my son. Yeah. I sometimes parent the child version of me when I'm parenting him, and he doesn't need me to parent who I was when I was a kid. He needs me to parent him. So what I have to just do is just be aware of that, Is it ever too late to do the internal work and change the way you parent? No, never too late. Absolutely never too late. I mean, look, I raised my children my eldest was 6 years old when I stopped drinking. So I was still crazy for at least a year or two after that. I probably still am to a degree, right? So I've been on my own journey. So like, without question, my eldest child they're nearly 17, has emotional neurotic struggles that are a result of the impacts that my behaviors and the way that I showed up to the world had on them. And I don't say that. And by the way, for the brigade, in case any of them are in here watching, I doubt they are, but the ones who go, oh, you know, you never talk about it from the other angle, and like, you know, wait till your kids grow up. Like, I listen to this, yeah? I hope my children judge me. I think they should judge me. They never asked me to bring them into the world. I brought them into the world. And at some point, I have to stand up and take responsibility for that. I did it way later than I would have hoped. So just to hold space for that side, let me say that, because that's the reality, yeah? And I recognize that some of their emotional, mental struggles are a result of that. I don't say that in morbid reflecting. I say it because it's the truth, and it gives me some power to try and create change in that. And I think that's just the truth. Newish here, you looked into neurodiverse connections and sensitive. Have you looked into neurodiverse connections and sensitive people? Yeah, so I talk a lot about highly sensitive people. I know I would call myself a very highly sensitive person. I know about the neurodiverse stuff. It's a tricky subject, like, for me to talk about, because I've never, like, I'm not a professional or anything like that. So in that sense, so I don't go down that route. I just talk from, like, experience stuff. Most of my friends with kids seem to self-abandon for their kids. How do you reparent while being a parent for them? That's a really good question. Look, I think a certain amount of self-abandonment for your children is needed, right? But how do you do that? How do you rest and recharge around that? I think that's the kind of thing. So I have systems in place for me today. You know, I get up and go to the gym really early and make sure that I create space for me. And that's not always possible for everybody, but I do have to make sure that I create space for myself. Otherwise I lose the plot very, very quickly. But I do think there's always time for us to do the work, right? Who do I surround myself with? What sort of, how am I using my time? You know, am I binging Netflix when all the kids are in bed, or am I doing something that could help me? And these things, like, sometimes you need to binge Netflix, right? So there's nuance in that. But, like, if we really want to do the work on ourselves, then there's ways to find it. And look, what is the work was different in all of the time, you know, but go out and experiment and try stuff, I would say. If only we learned to listen better, yeah. Talking about labels, would you try to remove the labels eventually? Would I? Look, I don't think you have to do anything. I wouldn't advise to do anything, and I wouldn't advise myself to do anything. If I can be gut level honest, clear honest with myself about where I'm at, then that's what matters. What I do worry about with labels is I get it quite a lot on some of my social media. I'll be talking, I'll say, here's an experience I had, here's how I think it shaped who I am, and here's what I do today in order to be able to navigate the world as a result of that experience. And then some people will go to me, oh, I used to think like you, and then I realized it was just this, and then insert some label. And it's almost like they're saying, and because it's that, there's nothing I can do about it. And I don't think that's true. And what I think's also really important is that when we're talking about anything that has no physical marker, then there's always scope to explore and be curious about what it is and why it's like that. Vinny, one of your videos changed the way I viewed my demons and future. Good. If one can't see a therapist to address your anxiety, can books be a good start? Yeah, they can. So can videos. So can, like, people do online stuff. All of it can be good, man. I mean, look, therapy's not for everyone neither. One-to-one therapy is no good for me at this moment. I'm not. See, people will hear me say that and say, oh, he's talking down about therapy. I think therapy's great. I know people that have done therapy that's brilliant. But I just become a good little patient when I'm in a therapy. You know, I think, why are they asking me this question? What answer do they want me to give? Let me give a really good, cool answer. We can't give our kids what we don't give ourselves. This is very, very true. I left my kid's mother because of her violence towards me, both physical and psychologically. What is the chance she will do the same to my kids? That's horrendous, man. I don't want to answer. I don't know. I don't know. But they're certainly going to be vulnerable to it, aren't they? You need to get help with that and support and solicitors as well. How do you maintain a happy marriage with so much trauma? I think you have to you have to constantly really come back to yourself and make sure that you're able to share that with the people around you. That really, really matters. I think what tends to happen in our personal relationships, not just romantic, but all of them, is that we begin to people please. Yeah. So, people will ask us questions and, ask us what we want to do and what we like. And rather than give the answer that's true, like checking in with our bodies, we've never done that before in our life, right? When people asked us those questions when we were younger, we were like in a hypervigilant state. What answer do they need me to give? And that can leave you feeling very misunderstood all of the time, right? Because you don't know how to convey the way that you're feeling. Someone says, how do you feel? And you think, well, I feel all right. Does that help you? Do you want me to be all right? Do you want me to be sad? I'll tell you whatever you need or want me to feel, because I'm a chronic people pleaser and I base my whole personality and persona around what you think of me. So I'm not going to check in with myself when you ask the question. I'm going to try and work out the answer that you want me to give. And then of course you're going to be left feeling misunderstood because you're never communicating with anybody all of the actual stuff that you're talking about in your mind, because you only ever talk to yourself about that. But you talk to yourself about it so loudly, you feel like everybody else should be able to hear it, but you're telling everybody else and showing a completely different version of yourself. And so until you start to break those barriers down, until you start to do some work on yourself, where you start to go, hang on a minute, let me really start to be able to communicate to people my truth, then you're always going to be left feeling misunderstood by everybody around you. And that would make sense if the only way that you survived when you were a child was to make sure that everybody around you in the environment was happy. If that's the role that you played in the family system, then it's the role that you're going to continue to play in your adulthood. So how do you survive in your personal relationships with the trauma when you're older? You need to start seeing it and trying your best to unpick it. And that's going to take time. It's going to need to be done slowly, and it ain't going to be fucking easy. And don't let anybody on Instagram tell you that there's 8 tips and tricks that if you follow them, you'll lay the best boundaries ever. Yeah. Because I don't believe it'll happen. And I've been actively working on this stuff for years and years and years. And depending on what's going on in my life, I can fall right back into the same old habits that I've had ever since the day I started this stuff. That's the truth. Yeah. It's not very Instagrammable, but that's the fucking truth of it. And too many people are quick to tell you that you should be able to nail it every time. So slowly practicing, being able to say, no, I don't think I want to do that because I don't enjoy it. And then you might have to hear things like, you told me you love that. Yeah, I know I did. And maybe I said that because I wanted to impress you. I didn't want to upset you. And that may sound silly, but that's why I said it. And here's my truth today. And why am I swearing a lot? Your fucking truth is allowed to change as much as you want it to. As you go on a journey of self-discovery, you best know that your truth is going to change. And if the people around you don't like that, or it makes them feel uncomfortable, then tough on them. And that's probably a bit too extreme to say it that way, but this is the realities that we're talking about of healing. It's not nice, pretty all of the time. It's messy, hard, complex, and difficult. I feel like labels are a cage we can inadvertently lock ourselves in. Look, I do think that labels can be like that. I want to make sure, like, my experience of labels is more predominantly that one, that they become restrictive for me. And I recognize that there are people that use these labels and find incredible amounts of freedom with them, and they can be amazing for them, right? So, like, just because one thing is true for me, it doesn't mean that I believe it's not true for somebody else. We're all different people. And if labels work for you in that way, fantastic. Go you. Keep doing that. My experience is that they can be quite restrictive, right? And both of those things are allowed to be true. How do you deal with trauma from past childhood and the parent not take responsibility for the participation in that? I think that's one of the hardest. Hello, Tilly. I think the reality is that if you've experienced trauma when you were a child at the hands of a parent, and we're talking about, like, we're not necessarily, when I say trauma, we're not talking about a parent that, like, I don't know, physically beat the hell out of us all of the time. An emotionally completely inept or, unresponsive one is a huge trauma as well. I don't even like calling it small t, because I think it does it a massive disservice. And so it's hard. And so you have to, in the end, adjust your own expectations of them, because your healing can't be dependent upon whether they give you the apology or the validation that you need, right? You can't chase that all of your life, because the reality is, particularly if they're that type of parent, right, that has made you experience that, you're not going to get that validation. And if you do, you will have no control over when it comes. So your only chance is to adjust your expectations. That might mean, for a lot of people, seeing your parent who may be highly flawed, like we all are, as the human being that they are, and having the relationship with them on the terms that they're able to have it. Or if they're further up towards the toxic level, yeah, then it might mean cutting them all out together, yeah. And I know that upsets people, and people find that really difficult to understand. But my line has never been, you should cut parents out of your life if they upset you. My line has always been that there is a large body of people, larger than we'd like to think, who for that is the only option. But the decision is down to the individual, their experience, and what they've experienced with their parent, right? And you just got to find where you are on that scale and find what you feel capable and feel able to do. And we're all different, and that's probably going to change throughout your life as well. I'm going to do one more because I need to jump off soon, because I'm going to go and do the school run. I started group therapy for the first time this week. So far, it seems to be better for me personally. Yeah, group work for me is 1,000,000 times better than one-to-one. That's just my experience. Boundaries are the hardest things ever. Yeah, true. This man is the only people should listen to. Thank you for always keeping it 100. Don't make me the only person you listen to, yeah? Because I'll get carried away with that then, and then I'll be on a power trip, and before you know it, I'll be talking absolute shit, which I do sometimes. How to stay calm when my narcissistic mum and bro push my buttons for reaction. I try a lot to not react, but in vain. Listen, have compassion for yourself when you do react. If you're living at the hands of a narcissistic mother that wants to keep pushing your buttons, it's not always your fault that you react. If it was as easy as saying, do A, B, and C so you don't react, then abuse wouldn't exist, would it, right? So power to you for noticing and being able to see the reality of what's going on, and try and have compassion for yourself in those moments when you do react. I think the best hope you have in these cases is to cut as much contact as you can so that they can't get to you. And when they do, because they'll find a way normally, or they'll do their best to, and there'll be ups and downs of that as well, right? But when they do and you do react, that's because somebody is abusing you, not because you failed. Let's be fucking clear about that, yeah, as well, by the way, because there's a lot of people online that seem to think that the only person that can stop the abuse is you, right? And I get it, and I understand it, and I get why we say it, but let's talk about real life as well. Okay, I'm going to do one more and then I'm going to jump. What do you recommend when the anger of what was done to you is so visceral and years later still feels so potent without externalizing and hurting those around you who you care for? Without self-promoting, I would invite you to come and do my next breathwork for emotional release. That's how I release my emotions in a safe way. I'm doing another free one that will be open to absolutely everybody in March. I think it's towards the back end of March. I will announce the date very, very soon, but keep an eye out for it. The reason I do that all of the time is so that I can let those emotions out of me in a way that feels safe. So come and join that and see if that works for you. I'll do one more. Heidi's recommending Inner You as well. You can sign up to the waiting list for the next cohort of Inner You that's on my website. As true as I feel your words, I also feel we are in a world that is constantly telling us to develop your brand as a person, personally and professionally, and once you have it, you cannot change it. Yeah, and so let's kick back against that and say that's not true. One more question. I don't do one-to-one coaching, but Inner You, the next Inner You is coming. Yeah, Tilly, drop me a message. Would you recommend The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate? I'd recommend absolutely everything by Gabor Mate, but yes, that book is amazing. One more, if there are any. Are you doing any more virtual emotional release breathworks? Yeah, as I said, the next one is in March. And good. Okay, look, I think we're about there. Hey, I had a huge narcissistic attack from my malignant narc mother tonight. As a family, we are stepping back from her. I'm glad you're doing it as a family, so you have people with you as well. Okay, look, that's good. As usual, what I will do is I'm filming this over there, so this goes on YouTube. It will obviously stay on my grid as well, and then I make some smaller videos out of it as well. And I really appreciate it. I really appreciate this space of being able to explore it, and I try my best to not answer questions that I don't know the answer to, and then the rest of them I try to explore in the best way that I know how. So if ever I say anything they think, no, that's not right, like message me calmly and nicely, because sometimes I will say things that are wrong. I always say to people, don't get angry for anything that I say, because I probably don't believe it by the next day, right? That's kind of how I work, and I allow myself to be wrong, and I think that's how I get by with a lot of the abuse that I get. I sort of think, no, I am willing to challenge myself, so we're good. So thank you, appreciate it, and see you all soon.